Now available on Lulu. John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at lulu.com today. Two series featuring so-called fan-favorite characters at DC Comics are coming to an end this summer. Now, this summer, we will be seeing the final issue of the Tim Drake Robin comic series written by Megan Fitzmartin, and we will also be seeing the end of the so-called Batgirls series that features Cassandra Cain and Stephanie Brown. Now, both of these books feature characters that were considered to be extremely fan favorites back in the 1990s. Unfortunately, due to years of mismanagement under DC's incompetent editorial, all of these characters have not been able to gain any readership as related to the multiple series that have been relaunched featuring them. And the cancellation of Tim Drake Robin and Batgirls is the latest series of failures for DC Comics, with characters that at one time were basically selling over 250,000 copies of their respective books. Tim Drake's 1990s Robin series basically was selling over 250,000 books a month every year from the 90s to the early 2000s, and almost went up to its almost 200th issue, whereas Cassandra Cain's Batgirl was selling again 250,000 copies and was also going out here and went up almost to over 100 issues. And Stephanie Brown, the spoiler, was a major character in both of those books. Unfortunately, all of these characters have suffered over the years of Dan Didio's incompetent editorial leadership, and they've also suffered under the current DC editorial, which has oftentimes gone on to make claims that they do not know what to do with these characters. Now, these characters were major players in the 1990s Bat family, and Tim Drake's Robin was a major staple of the Bat family from 1989 to about 2005, when the character was so popular he was carrying his own book that went on for almost 200 issues, and the character was a fan favorite that a lot of comic fans loved from the 90s onward. Unfortunately, what has happened at DC Comics is that when Dan Didio became in charge, he did not have much favor for the character, and instead went to go out here and promote another character, Damian Wayne, who was supposed to be the son of Bruce Wayne. And as he promoted Damian Wayne and pushed that character, Tim Drake was pushed into the background by editorial, which wanted to make the claim that they allegedly did not know what to do with Tim Drake in the aftermath of the resurrection of Jason Todd, the former second Robin, and the implementation of Damian Wayne, Bruce Wayne's son, as Robin. Now, with the return of Jason Todd and Damian Wayne to the Bat family, this created a really awkward dynamic that has basically derailed the Bat books, as I see it, for the last good 15 to 20 years. Because what has happened is, instead of the Robin character being somebody that the reader could go out here and self-insert themselves as and identify with, what has happened is that the Robin character, who was Batman's partner, has just gone off the rails, and instead of us wanting to be a part of the Batman adventures through Robin, what we are doing is having these two characters who were not good fits being shoehorned into the Bat family, and they're throwing off all of the complete story dynamics. Now, the resurrection of Jason Todd, which was hinted at in the legendary Hush story, this basically threw off the entire dynamics of the Batman family, because the death of Jason Todd, while it was done with a phone pole, did have a major impact on the entire Bat family, because it showed that not everybody is cut out to be Batman's partner, because a person who was supposed to be Batman's partner has to have their head in the right space. And Jason Todd, the son of a single mother and a criminal, just wasn't the person who was right for the job of being a Robin, and his death basically taught a lesson to readers that Batman 1 wasn't always right, and 2, Batman did make mistakes, and 3, Batman was a human being, because at the time, Batman was out here, he was really trying to deal with the fact that Dick Grayson had grown up to become his own man, and he had to deal with the fact that Dick Grayson was no longer going to be his partner, but was going to go out on his own as a man. And what he did, because he was dealing with that issue of Dick going out here and being his own man, was look to find a substitute. And because Bruce's mind wasn't in the right place, he went out here and got involved with the dysfunctional Jason Todd, hoping to turn him into another version of Dick Grayson. Unfortunately, Jason Todd was a product of a single mother household. He was emotional and out of control, and him being emotional and out of control meant that he really wasn't fit for the work of being a Robin, and this is what led to the classic story, A Death in the Family, which led to the death of Jason Todd, which I believe should have stayed canon because it showed that Batman needed to grow, that Bruce wasn't always right, and that Bruce did make mistakes, and Jason was one of the biggest mistakes that he had made, next to John Paul Valley, another character who Bruce got involved with, who wasn't a good fit for protecting Gotham due to his whole obsessive nature. So all of those characters basically gave the Batman character some growth as a person, showed that he was a human being who did make mistakes, and that he was capable of making these mistakes and learning from these mistakes. And Tim Drake's character fit into this because he was somebody who was suited to be Robin. He came from a healthy household with a father in it. He came from a household with a lot of structure and order, and he was a person with a very keen analytical mind, similar to that of Dick Grayson. And over the course of the storyline A Lonely Place of Dying, we got to see Tim Drake's analytical mind as he was going out here figuring out who Dick Grayson was as Robin and Nightwing, also figured out who Bruce was Batman, and we saw the process of Tim Drake growing into becoming a part of the Bat family, and his whole goal was not to go out here and be just a sidekick. He wanted to learn how to become the world's greatest detective, like Batman. So he was basically an apprentice of Batman, similar to what Bruce was when he was out here with Harvey Harris. When Bruce was with Harvey Harris, one of the world's biggest detectives and private investigators, he put on a Robin costume to learn more about crime fighting and all of the techniques of being a detective. And we were seeing the same process repeat itself with Tim Drake as he became Robin, and we saw Tim Drake grow into the role of Robin from 1989 up until about 1993 in multiple miniseries, and Tim Drake's popularity was so strong that he went from going out here and being a part of miniseries by the legendary comic book artist Tom Lyle to being showcased in his ongoing series that sold so strongly that it went almost 200 issues. And that was a testament to the writing of legendary comic book writer Chuck Dixon, who basically redefined the Batverse back in the 1990s, and all of that great success was all derailed, sadly, by Dan Didio, who went out here and destroyed Tim Drake's character, starting with his event Identity Crisis, where he had Captain Boomerang murder Tim Drake's father, who was a core part of his story, because Tim having a father outside of Bruce, this is one of the things that made Tim distinct, is that he had guidance not only from Bruce, but he also had guidance from a father. So when they murdered Jack Drake and wound up taking him out of Tim's life in order to make him more like Dick or Jason, what this did was start the derailing of the Tim Drake character and what was core to make him unique and distinct, because having his father in his life was one of the things that led to Tim becoming very objective about his role as Robin and kept him on focus as related to becoming the world's greatest detective and not just becoming another copy of Batman. So the Tim Drake character has suffered over the last 2 decades, as I see it, due to the inept leadership of Dan Didio. And as Dan Didio left DC Comics, what happened is editorial continued to allow no-talent hacks like Megan Fitzmartin to get a hold of the Tim Drake character, and instead of keeping the Tim Drake character focused on his original mission, which was learning how to become a detective, what Megan Fitzmartin has decided to do is decided to make Tim Drake a part of her fan fiction fantasies by focusing not on Tim Drake being a detective and a part of the Bat family. What she's decided to focus on was changing the sexuality of the character by unilaterally deciding herself that she was going to make the Tim Drake character bisexual. No, editorial never said that the Tim Drake character was bisexual. This was a decision made by Megan Fitzmartin because editorial did not have the backbone or the stones to check her and let her know that when you are working on commercial characters, you are supposed to meet the criteria and standards established by the editorial. Unfortunately, editorial had no backbone to check her, and this is why we got a focus on Tim Drake's so-called sexuality, and this focus on sexuality, along with the numerous identities as related to the Tim Drake character, have basically sent the character into a tailspin creatively, and that tailspin is why the Tim Drake Robin book wound up not selling very well. Now, the Tim Drake Robin book was one that fans actually were anticipating until Megan Fitzmartin came along and decided to, unilaterally change the character's sexual orientation and make most of the focus on Tim Drake's sexual orientation. And again, this was an extremely abrupt change because Tim was already rekindling his romance with Stephanie Brown, and your Megan Fitzmartin decided, oh, I don't like that romance, so I'm going to abruptly cut that romance, and then I'm going to bring in my own character and have Tim have this relationship with this male character, and then Stephanie's just going to accept this, which is something that would never happen in real life, because as I was doing research for my own novel, A Recipe for Success, where I talk about down low men, a woman would be devastated by hearing that, oh, my boyfriend that I'm dating is out here with another man. But in Megan Fitzmartin's delusional fantasy land, she wants us to believe that Tim Drake is just going to go out here and be with this Bernard guy, and Stephanie, who's already in a relationship with him, isn't going to have any feelings whatsoever about it. And then we're going to have Tim go from living with his father to going to live with Bruce to now living on a houseboat. And this houseboat whole story in the Robin series just was one of the worst things I ever saw, next to the art. And this book, which could have been a big hit for DC, turned out to be a huge failure. And it became a huge failure due to the inept writing of Megan Fitzmartin, the absolutely horrible art on this book. But DC wants us to believe, oh, they're canceling a fan favorite book. No, you're canceling a book because it was terrible and it didn't get the sales, and it didn't get the sales due to the incompetence of DC's editorial, which just does not want to follow the dynamics as related to storytelling in the Bat family, because when Tim was a part of the Bat family as Bruce's partner, he was selling 250,000 copies a month. But that wasn't good enough for Dan Didio and his agenda, and it's not good enough for DC, which continued to try to shoehorn Damian Wayne into a role of Robin that he does not fit in, because Batman, as it was originally designed by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, was never designed to be having a son. No, because the Robin character is meant to be a part of an avatar for the reader to insert themselves in. And that's what Tim Drake represented as Robin, and that's why he organically fits into the dynamics of Batman stories, and this is why Damian Wayne just isn't working, even though people are interested in Damian Wayne, but he's just not fitting organically, and this is why DC is having problems with Batman as related to its story dynamics, because Damian Wayne and Jason Todd are shoved into roles where neither character needs to be a part of the Bat family at this point. Now, another group of characters that are having issues in the Bat family are Cassandra Cain and Stephanie Brown, who were given a book called Batgirls where they were going to be mentored by Barbara Gordon. And this book really didn't work organically into the Bat mythos because DC, again, doesn't have an editorial that understands the dynamics of the Bat family. Now, Stephanie Brown was a fan favorite character in the 90s and became Tim Drake's girlfriend. And as she became Tim Drake's girlfriend, she became, again, a very popular character. And the spoiler was such a very popular character that I thought the best thing to do with that character was graduate her into the Batgirl role, because Barbara Gordon had already moved on from being Batgirl into Oracle, and she had a significant role as Oracle, working with IT and working with the computer networks, and that role allowed her to further expand into the DC universe, working with the Suicide Squad and also working with the team Birds of Prey. So Barbara already had a solid role in the DC universe, but DC's editorial wanted to put Barbara Gordon back in a Batgirl costume, and that was a major mistake as I saw it, because again, as I saw it, Stephanie Brown had graduated into the role and grown into it organically. She was the spoiler for a while, but I always thought the biggest mistake that they made in the 90s was not making Stephanie Brown graduate into the Batgirl role, because had she graduated into that role, it would have been a perfect fit, and she would have been a great part of the Bat family. But they decided to make her Robin, and that really didn't really flow organically. And then they decided to bring her back as a spoiler. But I would have if I was running DC, she would have been Batgirl. And that basically would have given Cassandra Cain a bit of a problem, though. But Cassandra Cain was a great Batgirl who carried a book for almost 90 issues. And both of those characters, again, they wound up with their stories derailed because they decided to bring back Barbara Gordon. And they thought, oh, we'll make a compromise with this Batgirls book. But this Batgirls book, like the whole book as related to the Tim Drake Robin, really didn't have a core focus. And again, these great characters were lost because of DC's inept editorial, and their inept editorial is the main reason why both of these books are being canceled. And they want to say, oh, these fan favorite books are being canceled, but what is really disingenuous about DC as related to this is that they don't want to admit why these books are being canceled. And the reason why these books are being canceled is due to the fact that they could not generate sales due to the poor execution of concept by grossly unqualified writers like Megan Fitzmartin, who has no business on a Robin book whatsoever, or any comic as I see it, because if you cannot stay true to the source material of a character and you want to unilaterally decide that you're going to write a character your own way, then you have no business in this business. And again, if I was an editor and I saw her trying to put that in a Tim Drake book, she would have been stopped right there, because I'm staying, like Jim Shooter, true to the characters, and I'm maintaining the integrity of the characters as the main priority. And again, this woman wouldn't have been working in comics if I was in charge, but DC's inept editors gave her a pass, and this is why DC has blown a chance at reaching a larger audience with a book that people were anticipating, but most of that anticipation on Tim Drake, Robin, and Batgirls was lost due to inept editorial, and this inept editorial is the main problem with why these characters have not been able to gain a readership or an audience over at DC. But they want to say, oh, fan favorite characters were canceled. No, fan favorite characters were canceled due to poor editorial and poor execution, and them sitting there saying, oh, we don't know what to do with Robin or Stephanie Brown or Cassandra Cain, when I know what to do with them. And I know that to get Tim Drake back on track, I'm going to have to walk away from all of this sexuality and identity politics, which makes people uncomfortable as they're trying to buy comics, and focus more on Tim being the world's greatest detective, and we'll focus on him learning about different techniques of being a detective outside of Batman. Because like Dick Grayson, Tim Drake is a character who can work well outside of Gotham City, and I could easily see him working on a story with the Elongated Man and his wife, Sue Dibney, because they're great detectives, or working with a Detective Chimp or one of the other detectives like Plastic Man. Lots of different characters he could learn different things from. And there's a lot of great stories where you could have Tim teaming up with these characters and learning more about the larger picture of the DC universe. And you could even go out here and have him working with guys like Wally West, or working with Guy Gardner, or working with different characters in different detective scenarios, and having him learn about different aspects of being a detective. Again, lots of different stories you could have told with that character. Same thing with Cassandra Cain and Stephanie Brown. I mean, you could do different things by graduating them to the Birds of Prey and working with Barbara Gordon, and maybe a Birds of Prey book with them working with Barbara Gordon and Black Canary and the Huntress. That would have possibly sold a lot better, but it's all about executing concept, and this is a big problem with comics, because you have a lot of really inept writers out here and no editorial to guide them, and this is why these books get canceled, and this is why these books wind up struggling overall, because there's no leadership at DC, which is a complete wreck at this point. And these two books just show me how sad the state of affairs at DC is, because under a good editorial team like Jeanette Kahn and Paul Levitz, these could have been books that sold in the six figures, but they wound up being canceled after 10 issues because you have low seed, no talents working at DC, destroying intellectual properties, and these two books are textbook examples of what happens when you hire the wrong people to run a comic book company, because these type of people run a great comic property like Tim Drake or Stephanie Brown or Cassandra Cain straight into the ground. Now, if you want to pick up my first comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu right now in paperback format, and you can check out how I put a comic book together. And if you want my other comic, E-Steam No Good Deed, it's available in the paperback E-Steam Blast from the Past, and it's also available on Kindle for 99 cents. So if you want to try both of those comics, you can click the links in the description box and check out how I go out here and create comics. And if you want to pick up some of my other action-packed fantasy fiction, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online bookstores like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. And if you want to see me make more videos about comics and the comic book industry, you can send a donation to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, Bride of Dracula, Goddess Next Door, and John Haynes team up to take on the Dark Vampire in this action-packed ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, Bride of Dracula in paperback and